First of all, thank you all for these amazing presentations. I feel like charged up, inspired. I just want to go home and write. Thank you for that. Like taking notes and like, you gotta take these ideas, change the structure. Thank you for that. I have a question that maybe I think Maria and Emily could both talk to this a little bit, and I think Maria, you might have something to say as well. It has to do with, is there a distinction between influence versus reverberation? So Bria, when you're talking about the sort of intergenerational conversation impact, influence that's happening, Emery, when you're talking about reverberation as sort of being present, right, within the body, or sound to be present within the body while you're not in the room, you're producing that sound. But I'm sort of going back to this idea that to reverberate has berate as part of it, right? To hit back, like to berate someone. That's kind of a diss embedded in that, sort of to hit back on someone. But the way you're talking about influence, Bria, is about sort of positive touch and being in contact in order to nourish and generate, move forward. So just thinking about these two terms in the way you're presenting the material. And certainly with Black Twitter and this idea of reverberating as a way of producing community, producing social impact. So.
I want to start first.
I'll start. So, I think for me, I really like Emery's idea because when we think about the way their intergenerational relationships, they're very messy. And so there's an influence, but then there's always a pushback. So like thinking about like growing up as a Black girl, because there's a denial of girlhood in an essence, which I didn't really get to talk a lot about. So much of Black girlhood is living in resistance to, and so even though there's intergenerational conversations between like mothers and daughters and older Black women and Black girls, there's always a pushing back against it, because if you are positioned in a space where you are viewed as woman even though you're not, then you are also told that you're supposed to know things that you don't. So you think that you know things that you don't. And so a lot of it, there's a tension between trying to figure out what is your narrative, and then what is the narrative that's been passed down. So I think Emery's concept of reverberation speaks a lot to that it's not as clean cut, and it's not always, positive.
Yeah. One, I would build upon that with one thing. Another thing concept I was thinking around with this is resonance. So Gershon in the Sound Curriculum book, which is the kind of book I read and I'm like, this is the book I wish I would have written, right? It's like everything is amazing. So he talks about kind of reverberation, and resonance and echo, and he draws this distinction between resonance and relevance. So in English education, the notion of cultural relevance is talked about a lot, and he argues that relevance deals with kind of the majority, whereas resonance is more individual and nuanced. So what's most relevant to people, right? Well, most deals with, quantifiably more people than less people or fewer people, whereas resonance, what resonates with you, is more varied and at the level of the individual. So I think that so with you introducing influence, right? I wonder if resonance, if something resonates with me, how that opens up perhaps a conversation with influence that reverberation doesn't necessarily.
I would say, as it relates to Black Twitter, both are definitely prevalent. I think the social media network as a whole has influence on like the community at large, but as it relates to reverberation, I think one thing about Black Twitter is that it doesn't just accept the good, but it also accepts the bad and the ability to dismiss things, the ability to diss things. I would say that's definitely where you see memes and gifs. Like specifically, I'm thinking of like the Cardi B meme, where it's like, mom, like when she was a little girl, and it's like, mom told me to do this, or mama told me. And I think like the ability to just make a joke out of it and just to enjoy it for what it is, I would say it definitely has its part. But I would say reverberation in a sense then influences the community, right? So then what we do, or what like the black community, what people of color do, they take that and take, you know, the diss or take the negativity and turn it around as a joke or just make light of a situation, which is then influencing culture and influencing industries and how they go about selling their product. And then that gets into like the black dollar and like the commodification of black ideas. But that's like a separate thing. But yeah, it's but it's prevalent. So
I noticed, Maria,
yes.
so when you were doing your presentation, you intentionally didn't say the curse words,
Mhm.
and I wanted to know, like, does it take away from the context of what you're saying when you don't use those words? And then going back to like Ria's presentation, when she talks about merging this idea of ratchet and respectability by not using the word.
That is a great question. I would say I personally chose not to say it. I think just for personal reasons, probably because I'm telling myself I like as a whole will stop cursing. So not even in like an academic setting. No, seriously, not even in an academic setting, but in a social setting. Like I'm telling myself just to do better with my vocabulary. But I would say I intentionally left them on the board. Like I intentionally wanted it to be read to understand like this is what is being said in plain language. So I like my personal choice was to leave it out. I would say no, like I bring it into the academy, like ratchetness and respectability politics. Bring it into the academy, let's include it. So, great question. I love it.
I have a question. I saw so many amazing connections between your work today in this panel. I don't know what Stephanie is, but she did a great job of putting this together. So I wanted to say the first two papers, Gabrielle's paper and Esteline's paper, I saw like this really interesting potential connection. One is like 18th century, right? One is a much more contemporary kind of take on Haitian studies. And on the one hand, I wanted to hear a little bit more about like what shapes your work, right? And this interest in like white womanhood in Haiti at this particular moment, and what does that like? How does this open the door or leave space for like the next part of your work that's going to be looking at like black women? I don't know if it's still 18th century revolution. I wish Professor Peterson was here because he does 18th century Haitian like revolution and political theory. So he's had to go run and do something. So I think he would have a better articulated question than I do for this. But I'm wondering like what is open now in the next part of this that takes up black womanhood in Haiti or thinking about gender role and sexuality, and whether you imagine that this would challenge the kind of like understandings of like white womanhood and freedom, or if it's something more complex. Do you imagine it's something more complex? And then for Esther, thank you so much for this reading of Breath, Eyes, Memory, and in particular this really difficult part of the text that I'm not sure if you read Edwidge Shenley-Kett's Create Dangerously, where she writes the letter to this character. And I was wondering if you could say a little bit about that, about the ways that your reading of this or this particular scene gets like taken up. Because I think you gave such a generous reading of it, and I don't think that that's often the case with this novel. So I wanted to hear about that. And then I saw this really great connection between Bria's paper, and obviously Bria and Emery's paper. And I was just seeing like I'm thinking about the ways that the black ratchet imagination and black girlhood oftentimes gets like deployed and disseminated through Twitter, right? Like and these particular kind of ideas get solidified through this vector, right? So I'm thinking about like the fact that Megan Thee Stallion the other day like tweeted out that she's taking her midterms, right? And I was like, okay, this is amazing. But thinking about how these ideas, not only the kind of corporate, the way that corporations take it up, but also like the way that black people take it up. If y'all could talk a little bit more about what it means to build community in these kinds of spaces, both in the way that you're thinking about it and the way they're thinking about it. And I think there's some really interesting connections there, and obviously connections between you and Dr. Petrov. But anyway, okay, long question. That's it.
Okay, so I guess I'll start. So my work has kind of been shaped by these roles within my own identity as a Haitian American who doesn't speak Creole, didn't grow up in Haiti, grew up in America. And so Castillo talked yesterday a lot about these gaps that we're trying to fill through our work. And so I kind of pretty much started there with questioning this idea of freedom and its like widely upheld association with property. And in Haiti, where that's a tricky, complex idea, where not everyone owns property, and how that's legally directed towards your freedom. And so when it comes to women within the novel only focuses on white women, and it's only a narrative of white women, yet black women exist within those spaces. And there's moments in the text where they're literally describing black women, black slaves in those spaces. And so moving forward, I envision this in a more contemporary moment and looking at how we can amplify those narratives of silence. And Miriam Chanty does this great. She talks about framing silence, and that's basically contextualizing contemporary Haitian women's writing within earlier Haitian women's writing, and using that as a way to talk about what's not talked about, so this voicelessness. And so I think that moving forward, I want to kind of incorporate this idea of talking about what's not said, but also connecting that through generations of work. So taking a step away from 18th century, but more contemporary stuff.
Yeah, so go next. In terms of the, I guess, yeah, I do definitely agree that the way in which I approached doubling in the novel was very like generous, especially given like the topic, and it was something I was very worried about when I was like planning, like when I was writing the paper and when I was like planning on presenting on it, because I didn't want to dismiss like the actual issues with that in the text and like the complexities of it. And if I approached it in any superficial way, like let me know, because that's something I'm trying to like learn how to not do. But go to the letter that Professor Figueroa was saying. So she actually, Brefi's memory, at which Dr. actually got like a lot of backlash from this novel, specifically from Haitian communities who thought that she was trying to represent Haiti as a whole and represent Haitian communities as a whole. And she was trying to express the fact that was not her intention. And I know that's kind of interesting, because I kind of said that the novel was a great way at looking at Haitian self-representation. But I say Haitian self-representation in the sense that a lot of times literary canons, we're not seeing like the complexities of like Haitian characters, or like there's not a lot of, I haven't been able to read a lot of like works besides from Edgar Dantica and Roxane Gay and similar with characters who look like me. And so when I meant self-representation, I meant like looking at like cultural representation and like tradition and stuff like that. But in terms of like it being like this self-representation applies to everyone is not the case, and that's what Edgar Dantica was talking about in her letter to Sophie, about how like she's not saying that Sophie's representative of every Haitian individual in the nation, but it gives us a glimpse at it in a way. And so I'm not sure if that entirely answers your question, but it's definitely something that I'm grappling with, especially as like a Haitian American who was born here, not in Haiti, kind of like taking on this type of work, because I don't want to belittle or like so categorize the work as doing this one thing, but it was something that I knew was not like being talked about as much as how like what's happening within literature can also be representations within the literature can be applied to what's going on in media. And that was like a connection I wanted to make, but it's definitely not the only connection there, and it definitely is probably one of the most generous connections that's possible from this work. But yeah.
I think I stand Black Twitter, and for me, alongside all things that are wretched, but for me, it was very important to include Black Twitter and include tweets from Meg Thee Stallion and just include literature, because what I found is that those are spaces that Black girls go to and take up as expressions of their full self. And so one of my goals is to make those spaces legitimate within English. So in my classrooms, when I teach, one of the practices I try to include like music. I try to include like Spotify playlists. I try to include Twitter, because those are spaces that Black girls are utilizing that we sometimes as English scholars don't see as legitimate sources of literature, but are very necessary. And when you think about like YouTube channels and blogs and social media, those are spaces that Black girls have claimed and marked as their space to bring their full selves to the table. And so I feel like I would do them a disservice if I don't acknowledge and bring those spaces into the conversation. I don't know, did I answer your question?
I would say, wow, this is so exciting. I would say definitely community is necessary. With understanding like the way I even began this project, it was really about me just enjoying being on Twitter as a whole and trying to relate that, like the Twitter aspect, which is not, most people don't consider it to be scholarly, but I definitely did, and trying to include it in the academy. And so one of the things that actually happened, which is very ironic, my dean, when I approached her with it, she was like, no, try again. And so what I decided to do, I went on Twitter and I wrote a tweet like, hey, like Black Twitter, help me out. Y'all make this go viral. I need to prove to my dean that this can be done. And surprisingly, I got like over 1,000 retweets, 3,000 likes, and my DMs were flooded. Like different just scholars across like the globe were just, use this, include this, here's some sources, these are my works. And so I went back and showed it to my dean, like, look, okay, so I can make this happen. And I would say just like being able to bring this side into the academy, right? So being able to like let people know like Black Twitter is relevant, is necessary, but more importantly, like it's transforming the world as we speak, and just showing how like the community like came to my aid, right? So it was just a matter of literally 280 characters. I typed it, and now I'm receiving all of this, like all of the positive feedback. And then even people are like, let us know when you present, you need to upload something, give us a story, like include it. And so just that community, having it and then bringing it into the academy and just really showing like this can be done, we too, like we can do this, like it's acceptable. So don't like, and then just showing like the younger generation, like don't deter yourself, don't think, oh, this is not scholarly. Yes, it is, because Black Twitter, yes, it's academic. Let's talk about it. So.
I had a question, actually, and thank you so much for the work. It was so inspiring and great to hear all the connections across the papers. A question for Arceline. I love the way you were positioning Dante Cott's project against a certain sort of domain of mass media representation, and I thought the reading of Dublin was really powerful as a kind of answer to the reductive simplicity of the domain of mass media. But I wonder if there's also room in your analysis for bringing to bear to the mass media representation the same level of rigor and critical acumen that you bring to Dante Cott's work, right? If that's worthy of that sort of same level of analysis and same depth of analysis. And then I also wonder, when you're sort of working across the domains of literature and mass media, as a kind of methodological question, how you account for the kind of asymmetries of power in those, the media industry on the one hand, and then the domain of literature on the other.
Those are very great questions. Very great questions. Yes. And yes. First question. So, yes, I think that it would be great and it would be just to actually provide the same amount of analysis that I provide to literature to media. I think why I decided to focus on literature was, I guess, the fact that I feel like Edward Dante Cott's literature, even if it's like has been appraised by like white literary critics, I feel like it hasn't gotten its like true like recognition or spotlight, even Haitian American literature as a whole. Yeah. And so that's why I kind of wanted to give more focus on the literature and how it like kind of speaks back, kind of like this call response to like news media. And to your second question, which I believe is like one of the hardest questions that I've gotten, I'm trying to think, because I think in a certain way, can you repeat your second question? Yeah. In terms of the fact that you're saying that like there's a similar power structure that's happening in news media as in like literature?
Well, I love the way you're thinking about modes of sort of so capaciously about forms of representation, right? And so my question is, it seems like there's a certain kind of asymmetry of power between the amount of capital invested in the media industries that you're so rightly critical of, and Dantica's work, right?
Oh yeah.
And I wonder if you're interested in sort of talking in more detail about the nature of that asymmetry as on some level part of like the challenge for Dantica, right? As kind of representational project. If you're responding to that massively corporately bankrolled domain of media representation as a writer of nuanced literature, you've got a challenge in front of you.
Right. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. I think there is. I don't know. I think what you're saying also brings up to me the power of like topics. So like when it comes to like news media, and these headlines, they're very stereotypical, very generic, very straight to the point, and like I hit and punch. And so if these and if those lines aren't like exciting or have to do with like some kind of like social political chaos, then Haiti's not seen. So like a lot of my research in the beginning was me looking at like how Haiti's actually covered, and they're mostly covered when there's like social political chaos going on, like the recent protests happening during the summer, or the 2010 Haitian earthquake, or even in relation to like politics with Trump calling Haitians shitholes.
Yeah.
I don't like to curse, but I feel like I have to say it because I it's just horrible the way it's just really horrible the way in which like President Trump has like shown up in relation to Haiti. So like it's like if you look them up on the Haiti on the website, you'll see a lot, and in terms of articles, it's in relation to these like negative like associations, and so there's this way in which like a similar power structure that's happening within news media is also similar to what's happening in literature, especially literature created by POC authors, because it kind of touches on what Elaine was saying yesterday about how like what's seen as like, oh my gosh, I want to read more is topics that have to do with trauma or like with like generational struggle, and it's like, but there's some sort of like give and take with that, because it's like me as an author, like I want to write about my experiences and experiences that have hit me hard, experiences that I want to learn from, and the fact that it may have to do with like traumatic experiences, I don't want it to stop me from writing it. And so it goes back to like, who are we writing for, who are we writing with, who are we engaging with, and so it's like this kind of like struggle, constant like debate on like what you're writing. And I know I kind of went off topic, but I feel like it all like has to do with your question, and so I wouldn't actually maybe call it a symmetrical. I think there might be similar power structures happening in literary canons as in with in U.S. news media. While like if we're dealing with coverages of non-white cultures, there's this like amped up for looking at things that have to do with like chaos, negativity, like political struggles, when it comes to like people of color, but with non-people of color, it's just like I feel like it's anything is seen. Like we see popular views of like white girlhood, not necessarily black girlhood, and if it has to do with black girlhood, then it has to do with like these topics that of like going back to like the personal is political by Carol's essay. It's like we can't separate like this like systematic like racism from our experiences, and so they just so happen to always be in what we write. But should we stop that? I don't know.
First of all, all your presentations were absolutely amazing, and like my hesitation to ask you questions is like my own insecurity of formulating questions. And that's of your presentation.
I understand my insecurity in answering them. It's just as it's just as great. So.
Honestly, I thought your presentation was really amazing, and I really liked your analysis of doubling, and I also feel like the slide that you showed with like the different words that are popular in news media discourse around Haiti, and like viewing Haitians as like responsible for their own like traumas that are rooted in coloniality is like really important. So I was wondering, in what way could there be seen as like, could there be a connection between like a national doubling, like a national doubling of the narrative of Haitians, and maybe in what ways could like Haitian American literature be like the quadruple like way of responding to like this transnational national doubling of a stereotypical Haitian narrative
Okay.
that is rooted in not wanting to face traumas of coloniality.
Right. So are you saying the national doubling in the sense of
Like I feel like this like the words that you use that are more like really repeating in news media discourse, especially around natural disasters, is like almost a form of national doubling. And you know, a way of not talking about like the national responsibility in creating like the infrastructure or lack thereof, or like how certain traumas or disasters are playing out, and instead of like talking about that, you're talking about like Haitians as like responsible for their own like work. And I kind of feel like that could be a national doubling. I don't know if you would feel that way, but I do think it's creating like a narrative on a national level, and we're talking about like the narratives of Haitians on an individual level in this book. And so I think there could be like a larger connection drawn.
larger connection? So are you sorry, question, but are you talking about in ways in which like so seeing how this like doubling can reach a national level in terms of how
News media discourse. Yeah, specifically around Haitians, I guess, in the time of natural disasters, or how you put it out. Like, there seems to be a certain like influx of attention that has to do with like trauma, natural disaster chaos. Chaos.
Yeah, I think it's so hard because it's really hard because I think it just goes back to my previous statement about how like it's so hard because it seems like whenever we're like, it doesn't even have to only do with Haitians. Like if we look at how like in everyday life, like whenever we're seeing news regarding Black people, it's them being shot or them committing a crime and all these kind of stuff. And so like there isn't a high like rate of them like looking at these specific groups without it having to do with like these certain like negative events. And so like that's why what I was saying at the end about why news outlets should like learn to do a mixture of the negative and the positive to kind of show the humanity of Haiti. It's like, how does that actually like work, right? Because in theory it should be happening, but how does it actually work? Like how do we bring them to bring their attention to Haiti or to these groups, and make them realize that it's like worth looking at them even if it doesn't have to do with these like bad events. But then again, it's like, what is news media's purpose? Is it to like, is it just to cover like whatever's breaking, whatever's like happening now, or, like in a bad way, or is it to like just like give a full perspective of every group? And so I think that's something I'm struggling with, and how that national doubling can actually like happen. Don't know if that answers your question.
I think you're pro at answering questions that are not that well formulated, so.
No. Yeah, and so I think you also asked about how like more Haitian American literature can be in.
If there is a national doubling, maybe Haitian American literature can be seen as like a quadrupling, or like a response to like, you know, having their own double consciousness or doubling of certain situations, but also having to respond to this larger like doubling that's happening on a larger scale.
Right. Yeah. So I think what I might want to say is that I don't think that Haitian American authors are writing with that intention. Especially, I feel like Adontica wasn't like, I'm writing this novel to combat against the way in which Haitians are represented in news media. That was just a connection that I like wanted to make myself because I thought it was important. But I think that like the way in which to indirectly to have that what you're saying occur is just to, I guess, write what you want to write. I don't know, like just like write what you've personally experienced, because definitely probably isn't the way in which like you've been stereotyped in media. Like just like write, because I think that's what Adontica did. Like she wrote partly based off her own life and went with that, right? And so I think that the way in which you like you combat the ways in which you're like marginalized to other areas or the way that you're seen. It's just to show how you see yourself and show how you see the people around you in your own work, and it just ends up like formulating or happening that way.
Maria, you was gonna say.
Yes. Okay. So disclaimer: I'm not familiar with Haitian culture, so that's the first thing. Like, I'm not familiar with it at all. But I am familiar with social media, and I would say one thing that drives social media is like monetary gain, right? So like everything that's done is for profit and it's for sale. So it really, to me, and from my perspective, just off listening about your research, it like social media presents this example of the colonized versus the colonizer, or like us versus them, and the positionality between the two. And so it's almost as if we, like as minority writers, we cannot allow media and or the line to tell the gazelle story, right? So when we question like if doubling is happening, I would say yes, like like everything you'll see will be negative or it will be bad, and it's not to any surprise, because that's what drives the sale, and that's like targeted and or geared toward dominant culture at large. And I would say, like, as writers, as researchers, that's where we insert our voice, right? So whatever community we align with, we insert a proper narrative and just deconstruct the notions that all things are bad. Because like Arceline already stated, for majority of the feedback is always negative and or negatively associated, and it just really gets into like the positionality that if I am this superior, state of being, then you are other. Like if you're not me, then you're this, and it just really like portrays like a distant, which is very false, but that's just what drives social media, and that's what is seen and taken in by culture at large. And so I would say not to leave it to them to tell your story, right? So like the purpose of just incorporating your voice into the dominant narrative, that's really like the scholarly work behind it. So yeah, that's my spill on it.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
I think it's lunchtime, but I appreciate